I remember lying awake in the middle of a nighttime haze, feeling each second pass by with a quiet sort of alarm. More and more often, I would jolt up in bed, lungs aching from the struggle to find oxygen. It was the kind of moment where you sense that something is off, a warning sign with no siren, and yet it makes your heart pound. I had spent various evenings like this, gasping and trying to soothe myself back into a fragile rest. My partner had been tracking how frequently I would stop breathing, gently timing these episodes with genuine concern. As time stretched on, her encouragement pushed me to visit a medical professional. Initially, I felt stubborn about it, certain that these breathing lapses would not evolve into anything dire. But the consistent pattern of these events forced me to confront a harsh reality. I might one day succumb to airlessness during sleep. Even while I knew the severity, my younger self was caught in a whirlwind of chaotic living, not fully prepared to accept specialized care or a methodical step-by-step approach for healthier habits. My daily routine included wild nights, risky choices, and a restless mind that refused to settle. In hindsight, I see the seeds of recklessness that hinted at my eventual brush with the unknown. I recall telling that medical professional, with a grim air of defiance, that if my life ended during slumber, then so be it. There was no deeper meaning for me back then, no convictions, no spiritual guidelines, no forward-looking perspective, just an odd emptiness that accompanied me like a companion. Little did I know, though, that an unforgettable encounter lay just beyond the horizon, ready to forever shift my perception of life, love, and existence in ways I could never have prepared for. I cannot emphasize enough how those nights before my major turning point were drenched in uncertainty. The physical discomfort, the gritty exhaustion, and the mental ruminations about my future started to blend into a thick fog. If someone were offering a how-to tutorial on dealing with nighttime breathing difficulties, I would have brushed it aside, convinced I could handle everything alone. This was my misguided, easy method, though it was neither easy nor methodical. Back then, I would roll my eyes at the mention of the latest trends in sleep technology, or the top strategies for improving overnight oxygen flow. I figured I would wait it out, endure, and maybe someday, if absolutely necessary, follow an expert tip that might be found in a step-by-step guide. I felt zero urgency to dig into any viral hacks about restful sleep, or any behind-the-scenes details about how the body transitions between wakefulness and slumber. Whether it was defiance, ignorance, or both, I could not see the danger lurking. My entire approach was to say, if life decided to halt my breathing, at least it would be quick. Such a perspective, in all honesty, was a product of despair as much as it was of arrogance. Neither medical warnings nor my partner's pleas seemed to pierce the armor of apathy I had wrapped around myself. Perhaps I was more terrified than I had initially admitted. One fateful evening, when the hush of the neighborhood allowed only the faint whistling of a distant breeze, I sensed a peculiar shift in how I was breathing. Normally, I would jerk awake with adrenaline rushing through my veins if I stopped inhaling air. But on this occasion, that shock never arrived. Instead, there was a gradual stillness, an eerie calm, as though I had drifted beyond the normal boundaries of my body's alarm systems. My mind processed the sensation of not breathing. It was surreal, almost like watching a show from a distance. Then, abruptly, an incredible feeling of freedom overwhelmed me, as though I had somehow relaxed in a new dimension that had been there all along, but never revealed until that precise moment. I felt as though an invisible cord had detached, freeing me from the limitations of flesh and bone. This surge of emotion was powerful, pure joy, complete wonder. At first, I assumed I had stumbled into a particularly vivid dream, the kind of extraordinary mental creation that enthralls you momentarily, but often unravels once you awaken in the morning. I even silently counted, trying to see if my mind was fabricating illusions. Yet the experience persisted, hyper-real in every sense. Looking back toward what I perceived as me, I observed my body resting inert on the bed, with my partner snoozing by my side. The image was deeply disquieting, but also utterly captivating. My eyes in that body were sealed shut. My form looked colorless, almost gray. I found it bizarre that I had the consciousness to stand near, gaze upon this motionless figure and not feel horror. Instead, my immediate reaction was a state of wonder. The separation of my spirit from the physical shell introduced an otherworldly perspective. My vantage point, hovering or standing I couldn't quite tell, gave me an odd sense of control, as though I could analyze this phenomenon with a calm that defied explanation. No step-by-step manual, no best practices or ultimate guide on out-of-body experiences could have prepared me for this. It transcended any logic or instruction. I looked over my arms and realized the absence of all the body modifications I'd acquired across my lifetime. My tattoos, my piercings, gone. Every trace of my old identity felt erased in that ephemeral realm. Where I expected to see familiar scars or ink, there was only a smooth, unblemished essence. This discovery rattled me because it visually confirmed that I was something else, a version unsullied by the marks of my past. Yet that pristine form was not comforting. It was alien. A swirl of confused reflection rushed in. Was I simply hallucinating, pulled under by oxygen deprivation? Or had I truly ventured into the outskirts of existence? Though at first I was intrigued enough to linger, I sensed a gathering gloom. The entire bedroom became enveloped by shadows, intensifying in color and density until I could hardly recognize my surroundings. A subtle pull, like a gentle undertow, nudged me away from my bed. I felt no immediate fear about my own condition, but I worried over the idea that my partner might awaken to find my body unresponsive. Somehow that concern was overshadowed by the intensifying force that drew me into a deepening dark atmosphere. Inner awareness told me to pay attention. Something was about to happen, something far beyond what any how-to tutorial on dream analysis could reveal. As blackness gathered around me, I found myself drifting through a corridor of swirling energy, a spiraling funnel that felt endless. Color drained from the environment, leaving only the heavy saturation of shadow. Within this void, fragments of memory emerged, bridging my entire life into a mosaic of regret, joy, disappointment, and everything in between. This haunting compression of time played out like a film on fast forward. Every moment I had lived, large or small, stood illuminated in perfect clarity, so intense that it felt like I was repeatedly living them. Emotions will always be the core of human recollections, and in that vortex, each memory arrived with corresponding intensity. Sorrow, rapture, guilt, relief, anger, delight. I felt them all with overwhelming sharpness. More unsettling was the apparent ability to sense how others around me, in those recollections, had felt too. If I had ever hurt someone, I tasted their pain as if it was my own. If I had ever brought happiness, I savored their warmth. This was the ultimate behind-the-scenes revelation of how interconnected our actions and choices are. The synergy of these experiences bombarded me. Memories of negative deeds, hateful words, or unkind gestures overshadowed the positive moments I glimpsed. It became starkly clear that the weight of harm I had inflicted outnumbered the times I had offered genuine kindness. A wave of remorse pressed against my consciousness. At that point, there was nothing more to do than endure the onslaught. Understanding how my decisions had produced heartbreak in others, and in myself, was excruciating, no matter how revealing it might have been. As I moved deeper into that bleak realm, something startled me, an underlying sense of pure, unfiltered malevolence. It began as a faint whisper in the distance, then crept nearer until I felt consumed by it. This negativity was not just an external phenomenon, it seeped into every layer of my being. My environment was entirely black, an absence of light that devoured any semblance of form or figure. A creeping terror started to rise in me, yet it was more complicated than just fear. It was like standing before an unstoppable force, ancient and fathomless, exuding a bitter, somber resonance that sapped all warmth. Around me, disembodied wails echoed, their tones reminiscent of absolute anguish. Adding to the horrifying experience, an indescribable smell permeated the space, an ultimate guide to revulsion that surpassed anything my living mind had encountered. The stench was rancid, suffocating, leaving a swirling taste of decay in my mouth that refused to vanish. I wondered if I was drifting toward an eternal captivity. That place felt devoid of hope or compassion, as if these concepts could never exist there. Something primal inside me recognized it as the abode of utter isolation, where time ceased to matter, and everything else evaporated into infinite despair. I had never considered myself particularly spiritual, tending to lean on logic or cynicism when conversation wandered into religion or the afterlife. Yet in that chilling expanse, I understood with striking clarity that life was not just a random phenomenon. There was an unspoken structure enforcing a moral dimension, an intangible framework that transcended rational explanation. As I experienced the screams and recognized the shifting presence of countless other souls, each grappling with their own torment, a piece of me longed for an escape. Yet oddly, I did not cry out for rescue. Perhaps I believed at some subconscious depth that I deserved this experience, that my willingness to live without regard for consequences was culminating in a final confrontation. This bizarre acceptance might have been a kind of admission of guilt, or maybe I had lost the capacity to hope. The sense of forward or backward vanished too, as if the notion of linear time had faded away. All that mattered was an endless now, a singular moment that stretched into eternity, hammered by the relentless currents of sadness and dread. With my vision ensnared in this darkness, I began to feel the presence of something near me. But it was not an attacker in a physical sense. Rather, it was an energy or awareness that accompanied me with observation. I could not pinpoint who or what it was. The feeling offered neither comfort nor threat. It simply was. Meanwhile, the swirl of agony from other spirits besieged my mind, the drama intensifying with each second. If there had been a how-to tutorial for escaping such an environment, I would have seized it, but no step-by-step guidance existed. I was on my own, unprepared and adrift. Even the best practices for mental fortitude or top strategies for spiritual clarity would have been useless. Words like viral hacks or trending now felt absurd in a place where meaning itself was overshadowed by stark finality. Despite calling out for absolutely nothing, I found that ironically, beneath the swirling gloom, I was grappling with my inner sense of conscience. Layers of wrongdoing rose up, clamoring for acknowledgement. Memories flickered once more, the times I had lied, stolen, neglected empathy, a mental relay of shame. I wavered between acceptance and denial, not sure which direction the moral scales would tip. I do recall one distinct moment. My thoughts returned to snippets of conversations where people had spoken to me about afterlife concepts or a higher power. I had usually brushed those remarks off, dismissing them in the name of self-sufficiency. Yet in that suffocating nightscape, echoes of those words surfaced with newfound force, as if they had always been seeds waiting to sprout in adversity. A wave of regret swept me, tinted with bitterness that I had never opened my heart to anything beyond the material dimension. Still, contrition did not seem enough. The environment weighed heavily, suffocating, intangible, and real. The more I sensed the swirling souls, the more I perceived that this realm fed on negativity. It was as though misery thrived upon itself, compounding, intensifying with each passing instant. If you can picture a behind-the-scenes peek at raw despair, that was it. The synergy of cumulative suffering formed its own monstrous environment, feeding on individual regrets and forging a communal woe. The entire place was a fortress built of sorrow. I saw no glimmer of escape. Time, or whatever shred of the concept existed, collapsed fully. Though I had no physical form to measure fatigue, I felt a grinding exhaustion. Dreariness swam in my thoughts, punctuated by a dreadful certainty that this was final. No more attempts to rectify mistakes, no more turning points. The gloom devoured comprehension of anything beyond its own domain. Even the recollection of bright moments in my old life took on a distant, unattainable glow. Some part of me realized that being locked in anguish forever, while simultaneously knowing that an alternative did exist once upon a time, was the worst cruelty imaginable. The synergy of those other spirits' lamentations confirmed this universal guilt. Every tortured cry seemed to also express recognition that we were collectively estranged from something infinitely better. The torment lay not only in the physical or emotional realm, but in the unshakable awareness that a different fate might have been possible had we only chosen more wisely. It was heartbreak, multiplied by regret, drenched in a gloom that no sunlight could penetrate. In this bottomless sorrow, I suddenly sensed movement overhead. With no advance sign, a radiance erupted, breathtaking brilliance, unlike any light I had known. The darkness recoiled, and although the gloom resisted, it was forced to retreat. The luminescence was more than an intense glow. It was warm, alive, immeasurably perfect. Love, compassion, forgiveness, comfort. The entirety of these emotions radiated from that light, a tapestry of hope woven into shining splendor. The longer I tried to look, the more I felt an overwhelming reverence and humility. I wanted to shield my eyes with non-existent hands because the power was so immense, yet I couldn't bear to turn away. Never in my entire life had I felt so paradoxically vulnerable and secure simultaneously. It was as if every happy memory from childhood, every comfortable embrace from a parent, every sweet word spoken by a loved one were fused into a single moment. The darkness around me recoiled as if scalded, and all of those infinite souls, too, seemed to shrink from the radiance. A barrier formed between the light and them, as though they refused to face it. In the midst of that revelation, I heard an impossible voice, timeless, resonant, forming words both thunderous and tender. It asked me to consider a choice, not in so many words, but the meaning was undeniably clear. An invitation hung in the air to step forward into that love or remain where I was. My mind swirled with astonishment, unable to comprehend such mercy in a place apparently devoted to hopelessness. I, who had done nothing in life to warrant this second chance, was being offered it nonetheless. A vivid wave of guilt surfaced, reminding me of every negative deed from my past. The swirling darkness that had pressed on me still lingered, but the light was stronger. It made me confront the question, did I deserve any rescue? My immediate response was no. I remembered how easy it had been for me to say, if I die, I die, ignoring consequences, neglecting spirituality, and living with brazen disregard for principle. How could I possibly accept such a gift after all the morally questionable things I had carried out? The brilliant presence seemed to sense my turmoil, intensifying the feeling of loving acceptance. With that acceptance also arrived a wave of sorrow. I perceived heartbreak at the pain I had suffered and caused. This heartbreak mingled seamlessly with compassion. It was a dynamic, living energy, both all-knowing and deeply personal. My knees, or whatever representation I had of them, sank as though the weight of humility had pressed me downward. It was a posture of submission, yet the love remained unyielding. A consistent reverberation in my core reminded me that I was not alone, that I was known and understood in ways no earthly relationship could mimic. The voice repeated its invitation, step fully into the light, or continue in the emptiness. The magnitude of that moment felt cosmic. It was not just about me, but about an eternal cosmic law I had previously dismissed. Accepting the offer would mean embracing a path of humility, truth, and accountability. Rejecting it would affirm my old ways, sealing me into isolation with no end. Before I could respond, another unexpected revelation caught my attention. A new vision manifested in the distance, a small child standing amidst the darkness, illuminated by a gentle glow. The area where this child stood was lush with green grass so vibrant it almost glowed, each blade distinct. The child was beckoning with fervor, urging me to approach. My heart wavered at the innocent figure, who seemed untouched by the heartache saturating that nightmarish realm. The child glowed with a purity that defied description. A swirl of emotions battered me, gratitude, shock, disbelief. Who was this being and why were they reaching out to me with such unspoken tenderness? Although I did not understand it yet, the effervescence radiating from that child was intimately linked to the luminous presence above. An unspoken link connected them. The child's soft, wordless invitation encompassed a gentle solution. Come home. I felt tears, though not in the physical sense, welling within me. My entire essence seemed to quake. Shame still wrestled with the wave of compassion, but the child's expression never mirrored disappointment or resentment. Instead, the small figure gazed at me as though seeing my essence rather than my errors. The gap between us felt immeasurably vast, and yet it also seemed like a single step might bridge it. Meanwhile, the light around me grew steadily, revealing the swirling shapes of countless souls trapped in their own despair. Some tried to shield themselves from the brightness, as if it seared them with truth. Others whispered in tortured voices or retreated deeper into the gloom. I stood at a crossroad implanted right in the heart of Cha. In that split second, I came to understand that a single nod of acceptance would lift me from this pit, while a single refusal would seal me here for eternity. The child continued beckoning, unwavering, determined. The luminous presence overhead never rushed me, never pressed me aggressively to comply, but waited with gentle, omniscient patience. I had never felt so powerless or so profoundly seen. Initially, I declined. I told that source of love, or projected the thoughts, that my failures were too severe, that I belonged in the darkness. This confession produced yet another wave of compassion. It was heartbreakingly beautiful because I realized the love was unconditional, not earned through achievements or moral perfection. Despite being absolutely convinced I had no worthiness, the invitation stood. Then the voice urged me to look again, specifically at the child. In that moment, I felt a profound recognition. The child was connected to me in a deeply personal way. A swirl of memory brought me to a devastating event in my past. An unborn child who never got the chance at life, discarded before they could breathe the open air. My complicity in that decision, the regrets, the sorrow, all flared up. I understood. This young girl, so radiant, was the soul of that life, grown or manifested in a dimension beyond typical comprehension. She was not condemning me. She was beckoning me with unstoppable love, the kind only a pure soul could offer. Realizing that revelation splintered my resistance. Tears, or the spiritual equivalent, poured from me. All at once I felt an overwhelming need to kneel further in humility, faced with a child who was the embodiment of the compassion I had never given. The magnitude of that realization was too big for words. Here was a being I had dismissed from my journey, a life I had forfeited. Yet in this luminous realm, she extended more than acceptance. She offered unconditional devotion. That child had thrived in a place unbound by time's constraints, blossoming into a soul that shimmered with innocence and endless possibility. This was the ultimate testament to the fact that I had always been cherished, even when I believed I deserved only condemnation. The synergy between that child's gentle invitation and the all-encompassing radiance overhead shattered the remnants of my pride. Strange as it might sound, I comprehended that love was stronger than justice. Or rather, the justice I had expected was overshadowed by a mercy that surpassed my capacity to fathom. Standing at that unimaginable threshold, I felt my entire being shift. Maybe it was the acceptance of forgiveness, or the letting go of a lifetime of stubborn illusions. The luminous presence flared brighter and even more radiant. I found myself stepping into that glow, not because I believed I was deserving, but because I finally recognized that to refuse would mean rejecting the very thing that had kept me alive all along: hope. An instant wave of warmth enveloped me. It was as if every cell, every particle of my consciousness, was embraced in the purest, most protective affection. The transition was not abrupt. It was like easing into a comforting environment after being outside in a torrential storm. The swirling blackness receded, shrieking in retreat, and a sense of expansion overwhelmed me, like a door opening onto infinite possibilities. The child remained to my side, gazing up with a smile of encouragement. In that breathless instance, time returned in a cascade of color and awareness, and I was thrust back into physical reality. My eyes flew open, my lungs convulsed, demanding air, and the rush of sensations was nearly unbearable. I found myself upright in my bed in the early hours, body drenched in sweat, limbs trembling in pain. My partner awoke in alarm to see me colorless and gasping. It felt as though every muscle I possessed had locked in spasm. A scorching thirst just about burned my mouth and throat. Scrambling for water, I nearly yanked an entire bottle dispenser onto the floor, gulping the liquid with an urgency that my partner had never witnessed. I collapsed onto the ground, spasms of terror and relief surging through me. It must have been an astonishing sight, but in that instant, All I could focus on was the memory of that light, that child, that unstoppable love. My partner lingered at a distance, baffled and afraid I might lash out in confusion, or maybe because the energy swirling around me was too intense. My mind was a hurricane of images, each one screaming for attention. Though my body reeled from the physical trauma, my soul felt strangely renewed, the memory of that limitless warmth still present within me. In the hours that followed, I barely found the composure to speak a coherent sentence. The mixture of exhaustion and an overpowering desire to stall time made me retreat inward, analyzing how to handle what I had just lived through. My partner suggested that I seek immediate medical attention, given the alarming situation, and I eventually did. Yet I withheld the details of my near-death revelation because, truthfully, I had no words then to do it justice. I only hinted at episodes of halted breathing and the extraordinary shock of waking up. Anyone searching for a step-by-step breakdown or a behind-the-scenes professional perspective would have found my silence baffling. All I knew was that something fundamental had changed. My outlook on life, once jaded, had fractured. Whether or not I would openly admit it, a new kind of sensitivity had taken root, stirring me to question everything I once believed certain. I began devouring books, articles, and accounts describing experiences similar to what I had gone through. What some labeled as near-death events resonates strongly with me. I discovered parallels: the sensation of leaving one's physical vessel, the life review, the presence of an all-embracing love, and the choice to return. I also encountered research detailing the best practices for better sleep, how real-time monitoring can sound the alarm to prevent fatal episodes, and so on. These how-to and tutorial guides were helpful on a practical level, but they didn't capture the profound metamorphosis that had taken place within me. Searching for meaning became an obsession, whether in age-old spiritual texts or modern scientific documents. In a short time, I dove into a variety of philosophies. Some describe this phenomenon as the ultimate guide in spiritual awakening, the ultimate confrontation with one's humanity. Others offered physiological or psychological explanations. None fully accounted for the living warmth of the light I encountered. More than anything else, I fixated on the memory of the small girl and each blade of grass that had shimmered around her feet. The details were so vivid, shades of green I had never seen in Earth's flora, all alive in a way that transcended normal reality. The child's expression stayed with me day and night, gently beckoning me toward reflection with her luminous eyes. It was as if that memory was a carefully preserved message, urging me to approach life with fresh insight. Over days, weeks, and months, the puzzle unraveled more. The deep knowledge that the child was intimately connected to the unborn soul I had once callously disregarded. This revelation was both joyous and filled with sorrow. I celebrated that she thrived in a sphere brimming with untarnished love, yet I grieved knowing I had contributed to a choice that deprived her of an earthly life. The recognition weighed on me, morally, emotionally. Her presence had endured, a testament that souls are not extinguished but continue in a world outside our linear sense of time. It was unimaginable, yet profoundly real. Determined to change in radical ways, I gradually sought to make amends, not only to others I had harmed, but to myself. Feelings of guilt started to transform into something else, a desire, an aspiration to do better. I realized that what I had encountered was more than a single moment of fear or reprieve. It was the hallmark of a second chance. The negativity that once fueled my choices gave way to a surprising empathy. Where once I had ridiculed the notion of a higher power, I now found myself drawn to prayer and meditation. I learned fundamental how-to strategies for spiritual growth, reading about step-by-step methods for deepening compassion, forgiveness, and personal accountability. Each day became a new layer in a tutorial for living with integrity, something I had not truly done before. The resonance of that light, that unconditional acceptance, guided me to adopt an entirely different set of motivations. The process was far from perfect. Old habits and regrets regularly wrestled with my newfound calling, but I no longer felt alone. I believed wholeheartedly that the presence from that other realm was still with me, cheering me toward clarity. As the seasons passed, I took time to rectify my relationships, particularly with my partner. We had faced intense struggles, arguments, betrayals, and heartbreak. But armed with a new perspective, I approached the process differently. I now believed that every interaction, every word, carried the potential for either harm or healing. I strived to listen with genuine care, respond with patience, and prioritize understanding over self-interest. This transformation was no viral hack or trending now phenomenon. It was a slow, sometimes agonizing, journey that forced me to confront each dimension of who I had been. The difference was that my renewed sense of empathy allowed me to do so without running away. I even joined communities dedicated to discussing spiritual awakenings and near-death experiences. While I normally avoided group settings, I found people who shared strikingly similar encounters. Their stories echoed mine in surprising detail, reinforcing the sense that none of us is truly crazy. Through these conversations, I gleaned more best practices for spiritual well-being and top strategies for channeling the lessons gleaned from these brush-with-beyond moments into day-to-day life. One pivotal point was the day I reached acceptance about my role in the unborn child's loss. I forced myself to speak it plainly. I had neglected my responsibility and let that life slip away. Although the choice was not solely mine, I carried enough complicity to call it a form of moral wrongdoing, if not an outright betrayal. Facing that reality demanded I shed layers of self-protection. I had to put aside the defensive reflex that insisted I had no say, or it was the only option, and stand naked in front of the truth. I could have chosen differently. The hardest part was reconciling the presence of that same child in the realm of pure love I had briefly visited. The contrast between having a role in her earthly end and then being welcomed by her in that ephemeral domain was staggering. But that was the purpose, I realized, to illustrate that love triumphs over blame, that souls can harbor forgiveness beyond what we, in our mortal minds, can conceive. This recognition was a turning point. If someone were to create a behind-the-scenes film of my life, that moment of realization would be the emotional climax, the turning tide. My transformation did not happen overnight. I experienced relapses of old, self-destructive patterns, anger, cynicism, self-pity. Yet each falter carried me back to the memory of the swirling blackness, the vacant misery, and then the potent brilliance that liberated me from it. I discovered that I had an entirely new perspective on moral decisions, big or small, from how I spoke to a stranger to whether I could stomach lying about trivial matters. I realized that the consequences of these acts, while not always immediate in an earthly sense, reverberate through energies we can't fully perceive. It threatened the comfortable illusions I had once indulged in. The unstoppable love from that luminous source subtly guided me to become more transparent, authentic, and open to redemption. I also learned that my transformation was not just for me, but for the people around me. By stepping into the light, even metaphorically in day-to-day life, I was not only changing myself, but affecting others in ways I never could have expected. At times I felt apprehension and confusion, wishing there was a formal ultimate guide that outlined the complexities of handling a near-death revelation. In the absence of that, I collected fragments, ancient spiritual writings, scientific analyses, modern self-help resources, heartfelt testimonies from survivors of similar experiences. Each piece revealed a new angle of the puzzle. I occasionally encountered cynics who belittled what I described, chalking it up to neural illusions triggered by my body's oxygen-deprived state. In earlier days, that skepticism might have shattered my fragile faith, but it no longer fazed me. How could I be derailed from truth that now ran through my veins like a living pulse? I had witnessed something beyond the scope of logic or chance. My subsequent personal changes had no rational explanation other than a genuine spiritual shift. Unshakable and permanent, the memory of that shimmering love remains inside me. Another change took shape in how I perceived the tangible world. Nature, once a backdrop for my daily life, took on a sacred quality. A sunrise was no longer just an astronomical event. It became vibrant evidence of living color. Like the grass the child had stood upon in that other realm, I now saw details in leaves, water droplets, the fur of an animal. Each contained a spark of that same creative force that had shown me mercy. I also grew attuned to the intangible connections between people. No conversation was meaningless, no act of kindness wasted. Even fleeting encounters emitted a ripple effect in ways I once considered irrelevant. While I was not trying to turn every moment into a sermon, I sensed a deeper significance. I trembled at how cavalierly I had once treated my own health, ignoring standard practices for avoiding complications from my breathing disorder. But love, in all its forms, gave me a renewed sense of stewardship over my body and mind, making me want to do better. Eventually, I found the courage to share my story more openly, not as a platform for preaching, but rather as an offering. I believed that somewhere, someone might be trapped in their own cycle of denial, cynicism, or self-hatred, just as I had been. Perhaps hearing about my encounter might open a crack for hope. On one occasion, while exchanging personal stories with a confidant, I confessed that the old version of me was spiritually void. I had lied, stolen, hurt people, used substances, and harbored a mix of apathy and resentment. In some sense, I was a kind of murderer too, not because I pulled a trigger or held a blade, but because I dismissed the value of a life that was partly my responsibility. This raw admission felt both excruciating and liberating. I realized that acknowledging our own darkness is crucial if we wish to let light in. A friend later told me that this confession inspired them to re-evaluate their own life choices. In that small ripple effect, I discovered that unconditional love can flow outward, igniting pockets of transformation in others. People sometimes ask if I experienced actual flames, or the classic fire and brimstone depiction of a certain realm. My answer remains that nothing I encountered approached the typical dramatization. The reality was more profoundly terrifying because it was an utter void, a vacuum of positivity, a freezing sense of emptiness that paradoxically felt like burning, not through literal heat, but through the total absence of warmth. If I had to brand it in trending now language, I'd say that I got a behind-the-scenes look at the ultimate spiritual freeze, a place where every fiber of your being yearns for the slightest spark of light and cannot find it. That hollow stillness, reverberating with the echoes of countless lost souls, was the pure embodiment of hopelessness. Fire, ironically, might have offered some form of release, but I encountered only suffocating blackness, where even the memory of warmth seemed unattainable, until the moment that radiant love broke through. Such an encounter would be impossible to forget. I live each day with the knowledge that none of us is beyond redemption, no matter how we might have squandered our old existence. I found that letting go of guilt and shame about the past opened the door for personal growth. Through that vantage, I frequently encourage others to let compassion guide them, not fear. I incorporate easy methods for mindfulness, a morning routine where I breathe deeply and reconnect with the memory of that unconditional acceptance. I also watch my sleeping habits more vigilantly, adopting top strategies recommended by medical professionals to reduce apnea episodes. This approach includes consistent bedtime hours, sleeping in positions that optimize airflow, and staying hydrated. Even though these seem like small details, for me they symbolize a renewed responsibility for my own well-being, acknowledging that I was given a second chance for a reason. Sometimes, the memory of the little girl reappears in my thoughts. I sense her presence gently reminding me that love is unstoppable, bridging our mortal experience and the eternal domain. In moments when I am tempted to revert to bitterness or frustration, I remember her unwavering gaze in that sea of gloom. She was urging me to follow a better path, both for myself and for those I encounter. It's a silent vow I keep, to honor the mercy I was gifted that night. My heart swells with gratitude for the opportunity. People occasionally ask if I'm certain about what I saw and felt. It's as if they expect me to waver, but the recollection is etched into my innermost being, more vivid than any memory from my day-to-day past. The love there was infinitely more potent than any I had experienced in the physical world, and there is no confusion in my mind about that truth. Today, I choose to live with a sense of wonder, mindful that each moment brims with potential. Even mundane routines, like sharing a meal, calling a distant friend, or caring for someone unwell, carry echoes of that luminous realm. I have become aware in a deeper sense that every decision can either amplify love or amplify darkness. Looking back, I'm stunned by how easily I once disregarded the worth of my existence, shrugging off pleas from loved ones who only wanted to see me thrive. For anyone listening, I might say, be honest with yourself, even if it leads you to painful realizations. Seek the path that fosters healing for yourself and those around you. The ultimate guide, if it exists, might simply be found in authentic love, the kind that demands humility, truthfulness, and genuine compassion for others. When approached with sincerity, it has the power to loosen the tightest chains. In the aftermath, I sought out organized spiritual communities aimed at bridging near-death experiences with everyday living. Through conversation and reflection, I explored ways to integrate everything I had learned. Some participants in these groups offered how-to sessions focused on meditative prayer, step-by-step instructions for self-forgiveness, or expert tips on guiding others through similar traumas. I found these insights enlightening, but the raw power of my own direct encounter overshadowed all formal instruction. I realized that sometimes the greatest teacher is personal experience. We can glean knowledge from the latest trends in mindfulness or top 10 strategies for self-improvement, yet one life-altering event can teach more than 1,000 courses in spirituality. I became resolute in my desire to pass that understanding along in a respectful, heartfelt manner. Throughout this metamorphosis, I chose to be baptized, marking not just a ritual, but an external reflection of the internal shift. In the quiet preludes leading up to the ceremony, I revisited mental snapshots of that other realm, especially the child's comforting invitation. As water poured over me, I pictured the memory of that brilliant radiance washing away my old self, giving rise to a new beginning. Those who think that a single act might be an oversimplification miss the broader point. It was the acceptance of a deeper truth, aligning my outer expressions with the revelation in my heart. My partner, too, witnessed the gradual transformation in me. Although it didn't erase the difficulties we had faced in our relationship, it became a valuable cornerstone for rebuilding trust and affection. We learned how to have honest discussions about regret, sorrow, and hope. In practical terms, it became a joint process, tutorial-style improvements in communication, sharing both small tasks and larger goals. But the bedrock was love, an echo of the unstoppable force I encountered in that swirling darkness. Over the years, as I gained more confidence in my sense of purpose, I quietly offered support to others battling guilt, hopelessness, or fear. Occasionally, I revealed fragments of my own story to them, omitting certain intimate details when the person wasn't ready to hear them. Sometimes, simply being an open ear helps people sense they're valued and not beyond redemption. If sharing a fleeting recollection of my near-death journey helped someone feel less alone, I considered that a blessing. The reactions varied. Some insisted it was a hallucination or delusion, while others gravitated to it with awe. These encounters taught me that how we perceive mysteries often mirrors our own beliefs. At times, I was asked for a behind-the-scenes account of everything that occurred while I was unconscious. I learned to speak from the heart, letting the story flow as it would, never pushing someone to interpret it a specific way. Everyone must walk their own path of realization. In truth, describing the luminous realm and the intangible love that permeated it is like attempting to verbalize colors unseen on Earth. The words cannot fully convey it, and so I resort to approximations. Yet I maintain that any measure of language is worth articulating. We share testimonials not to be revered, but to plant seeds of possibility in those who question the confines of physical reality. If a person is willing to glance past the surface of cynicism, they might unearth truths that defy expectations. This is why I share my story, to remind myself and others that life is brimming with layers we rarely acknowledge, that the darkness is real, but so is a radiant love, immeasurably greater. For me, that light possesses an identity transcending easy definitions. Some call it divine love, others name it universal consciousness. What cannot be disputed, in my personal experience, is its healing capacity and unstoppable generosity. Occasionally, I reflect on that instant of despair in the swirling void, when I believed all hope gone. Then I recall the hush that enveloped the moment before the light appeared, as if the entire universe paused. That hush was the pivot between devastation and rescue. It stands as the single most transformative tick of time in my recollection, a quiet so profound that nothing could overshadow its significance. Every day, I attempt to honor that hush by engaging with others in a more compassionate mode. I sometimes stumble. Old habits occasionally resurface, but I remain steadfast in the knowledge that the path of light, however challenging, outstrips any shallows of hopelessness. No tutorial or how-to can replicate direct communion with that form of holiness. But they can nudge us to be receptive, to quiet the noise of ego and cynicism, and attune ourselves to the energy of forgiveness. At times, I weave prayers into my routine, a silent conversation with that radiant presence. They lack the formal recitations some people use, but they flow from an authentic place of gratitude and need. I thank the luminous realm for pulling me from an eclipse of bitter emptiness. I ask for guidance to remain humble and giving. I reflect on the memory of that child, her unwavering invitation, that minuscule patch of grass alive with supernatural color. Each recollection is a puzzle piece that forms the larger mosaic of my transformation. Standing in my living room or driving in the car, I find solace by conjuring the sense of that unconditional love. I close my eyes for a second or two, no matter where I am, and let the memory wash over me. The effect is immediate, a gentle wave of calm, an echo of that realm whispering that I remain cherished, and that I can extend that cherishing to someone else. My family and acquaintances frequently comment that I am a different person now. Some say I seem softer, while others describe my aura as calmer or more empathetic. A few speculate that I might be simply getting older and mellower, but those who know the full breadth of my journey realize it's something more profound. We all age, but not everyone experiences a pivot so intense that it redefines the entire sense of self. A near-death experience, or perhaps a brush with the truth beyond mortal illusions, has the power to rewire priorities. I no longer chase the same fleeting highs or feed the same addictions. I don't declare moral superiority. In fact, I maintain a profound sense of my own flaws. Yet that awareness catalyzes me forward, pushing me to champion love over indifference, unity over division. I remain convinced that sharing stories like these can make a difference in how we collectively understand love, purpose, and second chances. The short version of my testimony is straightforward. I was lost, unconcerned about whether I lived or died, and I ended up glimpsing a realm more real than anything in our day-to-day dimension. Within that realm, I witnessed the extremes of darkness and despair, then discovered a radiant love that dispelled it. The living child I encountered personified forgiveness, forcing me to confront my complicity in her earthly demise, and ultimately, I was given an unearned choice to return. I woke physically, forever changed. For me, that is all the evidence I need. For those who question, I offer no pressure, only the knowledge that if they too encounter an unimaginable darkness, the unstoppable brilliance of love can still break through. Some people have told me they envy such an experience, believing it bestows unwavering certainty about deeper truths. But it is not an experience I'd wish for the faint of heart. The intensity of the suffering and the confrontation with my own moral failings were brutal. Yet paradoxically, I wouldn't trade it, precisely because it forged something new in me, a stability grounded in that radiant love, something that transcends mere positivity or optimism. If you want a step-by-step process for transformation without undergoing life-threatening danger, I encourage exploring the best practices for fostering empathy, forgiving yourself daily, engaging in mindful reflection, and nurturing connections with others who support personal growth. These strategies can serve as signposts toward living a more purposeful life, even if they don't replicate the raw trauma of my journey. In the end, the real challenge surfaces long after the intense moment is over. How do you maintain that commitment to love and mercy when faced with everyday frustration or disappointment? How to apply these revelations in the face of mundane stresses? That is where the true work begins, and it's an ongoing process. But my encounter taught me that none of us are alone in the spiritual sense. There's a bigger tapestry weaving our stories together. If any piece of my narration resonates, perhaps it's a whisper from that tapestry, calling you to step forward, to transform, to acknowledge that real meaning exists beyond the limitations of daily life. And so, here I stand, many chapters later, alive in a vibrant sense of the word. My old perspective has crumbled, replaced by awe at the interplay between the physical and unseen. While I occasionally still face episodes of breathing complications, I no longer treat them carelessly. I take preventive steps, heed medical advice, and remain keenly aware that this physical frame is a temporary vessel for a soul that once soared free. That knowledge alone changes everything. Whether you call it a behind-the-scenes understanding, an ultimate guide to spiritual insight, or simply a wake-up call, I now carry it with me in each breath. Every rise of my chest is a gentle reminder of that night I hovered in gloom, then witnessed an outpouring of a love that defied categorization. At times I'm asked, how can I be so certain that this was genuine and not just a fleeting hallucination? My answer is that illusions rarely provoke such profound evolution of character. People don't typically emerge from daydreams completely remodeling their moral framework. It wasn't a fluke creative dream that ended in panic. The clarity, the knowledge imparted, and the unwavering impression left behind have stayed consistent, unshakable, through all subsequent tribulations of my life. My partner, close friends, and even acquaintances can see the difference. It emanates in the way I communicate, the empathy I offer, and my readiness to stand by others in times of crisis, rather than retreat behind cynicism. In closing, what happened that evening etched a deep scar on my existence, but it is the kind of scar that testifies to rebirth. My worldview shifted from apathy to heightened consciousness about the fragile, precious nature of life. Without that terrifying sojourn in a space void of hope, I would never have found the unstoppable warmth waiting to retrieve me. I share these reflections for whoever is willing to listen. If this narrative sparks interest, curiosity, or even doubt, I encourage you to keep an open mind. Explore the possibility that there's far more to existence than meets the eye. Perhaps the best takeaway is that we can each step into the light, whether physically or metaphorically, anytime we acknowledge the unconditional love that exists beyond our everyday illusions. It's never too late to choose a path anchored in empathy and humility. Even one small pivot toward compassion can create ripples that expand beyond our immediate understanding. Embrace that step. Because if there's one thing I learned in that timeless void, it's that the darkest spaces cannot endure in the face of a love so pure, so unrelenting, that it reshapes eternity with a single radiant beam.